Hello there, and welcome to the webinar today. I hope everybody's having a great day. I'm looking forward to sharing this content with you. My name is Ian Goodrich, and I am the product marketer at Spire Global. And I'm joined today by Mark Held, the CEO of Odin. And we both thank you for taking the time. As everyone settles in, I wanted to mention a few points. First up, everyone is welcome to use the question and answer feature in the GoToWebinar panel. And we promise to respond either later today or during the Q&A time at the end of the session. And everyone is currently on mute, so no one needs to worry about background noise. Okay, so today we're going to run through the following things on the agenda. As you can see, both Mark and I will give a brief overview of our companies. I will then provide a foundational overview of AIS data and show a visualization of that data via a demo. Mark is also going to be demoing today and will be sharing his plans on predictive logistics in his space. Now, to get us started and make sure that everyone the GoToWebinar is cooperating with everybody, we're going to start out with a quick poll. So I'm going to bring up this question, and actually within your GoToWebinar window, it's going to ask everybody to answer the following question. Are you currently using or considering using data to model or forecast risk in your supply chain? I'm going to go ahead and wait a few seconds for that to circle through, and feel free to go ahead and respond. Okay, just a few more seconds. And looks like we're getting some pretty good responses. We're up at 81% of people have submitted, 88%, great job. I don't think we're going to get much above 90%, but that's great. So that's interesting results, and I will actually share those in just a second. So we are looking at about 30% of you saying yes currently, you are using data. 30% of you are looking at adding into it this year, and then the rest of you have actually said that you are not currently and you don't have any plans. So thanks for responding. 94% of you responded to that webinar. That was very helpful. Okay, moving along, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Spire does and kind of help everybody understand a little bit more about why we're here, why we're sharing this information with you. So at its core, Spire is a data and analytics company, but what people think about us is most interesting is actually how we go about collecting that data. In a little over 3 years from our first launch, Spire has built the largest active constellation of radio frequency listening satellites. And we collect and process data, including ship tracking, aircraft tracking, GPS radio occultation, and custom RF listening products with that satellite constellation. What makes us a little bit different, and the fact that we're quite proud, one of the facts we're really proud of, is that we actually design, build, and operate our complete value chain. The only part of the process that we hand off to others is the actual physical rocket launches. This gives us the ability to really manage the data delivery side, which is the reason that Mark from Odin is here to talk to us in a little bit about how they're using the AIS data. Now, before we go into the demo, I did want to do spend a little bit of time on a level set of AIS data. Majority of people that sign up for the webinar, based on your backgrounds, from what we could tell from your companies and things, will probably be very aware of what AIS data is. But I did just want to level set just in case there was any questions. AIS is a tracking system used on shipping. And when satellites are used to detect AIS, it's referred to as satellite AIS, so SAIS rather than TAIS, which is more the traditional. And as you can see from the bullets there, it was originally built to help with collision avoidance and has been mandated for quite some time. Satellite AIS came along as a benefit to the limits of regular AIS. Over 50 nautical miles, AIS is not able to, is no longer able to be collected. Whereas you can see from the image, the signals actually pass very well up vertically over 400 kilometers into low Earth orbit, which is where our 58 satellites currently are. Now, on the right-hand side of the slide here, you'll see the fields that are coming in that AIS messaging. And an AIS transceiver will send this message depending on the vessel's speed. So if the ship's at speed, some of these fields will get updated every 2 to 10 seconds, and then some will slow down as the vessel's at anchor or going slower. Some critical ones that are quite useful to look at from a modeling and a forecasting point of view are obviously unique identifiers, which is bolded there as the MMSI, position, longitude and latitude, speed, and items such as draft, which obviously could indicate the potential load of the vessel. Now, to help visualize what a global AIS data set looks like, I'm actually going to pause here and switch over and bring up a worldwide view of those ships. So what I'm showing on the screen right now is a global snapshot of cargo shipping, tagged by its current speed. That's the color of the triangles, and then actually currently being overlaid with wind speeds at their location. And as you can see, even though this is just cargo ships, so it's probably filtered down to maybe 2/3 of what is currently on the map, there's an awful amount of data being collected, especially when you look at it from a global side. It is also interesting to see how the shipping is reacting to weather events. If I happen to zoom in here close to off the northeast coast, you can see the way vessels are are moving around the kind of stronger winds that are being forecasted. So hopefully that was a useful introduction to AIS data. I'm now going to pass it over to Mark, who is going to run through Odin with everybody and give us a demo of his platform. Mark, hopefully you're there.
Howdy. I'm Mark. It's nice to meet all of you. Let's see if you guys can see my screen. All right. So maybe I have to do this.
Okay, Mark, you should be able to show your screen right now. So.
Great. All right, so hi, I'm Mark. I run a company called Odin, and after selling my previous company in the maritime intelligence space called WEFT, I jumped right back into it with the company that I want to share with you today called Odin. Odin helps large manufacturers optimize their in-transit inventory by tracking and analyzing the movement of shipments around the world. And by large manufacturers, we mean guys like Procter & Gamble, Anheuser-Busch, Unilever, people who move a huge volume of things around the world. And for folks like these, knowing where an individual shipment is great, but the impact of knowing where shipments are moving over time and seeing where inventory is being built up and seeing how things are flowing around the world has a measurable impact on both working capital costs and inventory buildup. And when you're talking about billions of dollars worth of goods flowing around the world, for every day you can get an asset off your books faster, it's worth tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So, that's to say that, we track pretty much everything that goes on in the global supply chain, from vessel movement to airplane movement to truck movement, all the way down to the pallet level, using public data sets, private data sets, and our own proprietary data sets. Before I jump into how we do all this stuff, I kind of want to tell you about where we fit into these organizations. So when you're talking about companies like Flextronics or Apple, being able to figure out where a shipment is generally requires a whole entire team of people. You've got, folks calling up customs brokers, ship captains, warehouse foremen, truckers, pretty much anybody who would ever touch a shipment just to figure out where a shipment is. But then to figure out how to move your product around the world generally requires information that doesn't exist. So we tend to help alleviate these issues. We help figure out, where is my shipment? When will my shipment arrive? How do I manage a disruption that's going to impact my shipments? Do I need to call customs to kind of expedite some container movements? Just from the operational perspective, and then from the strategic perspective, we help our customers figure out, do I ship here? Do I ship there? Do I ship today, tomorrow, next week using this route, this carrier, that carrier? Am I building up inventory? Is my end retail customer holding on to inventory longer than they need to, forcing me to manufacture more stuff and hold on to it? So that's the high level perspective of what Odin does. And please feel free to ask questions at any point throughout this webinar. I'm more than happy to pause and talk about stuff. But just to kind of tell you about how we gather the data, one of the data sets that we capture is from this traditional asset tracking model. So we up and developed the lowest cost pallet tracking solution in the world that goes on at the point of manufacture. And what you'll see on the left of the screen here, this guy, you can see a customer slapping one of our devices onto a shipment at the point of manufacture and going all the way to the final point of retail. And throughout the course of that shipment, it's pinging back to us. It's giving us information about location, temperature, humidity, shock, vibration, a couple of other environmental stuff. And the thing that makes us unique is, the device that we developed, it's not GPS, it's not cellular, it's not really Bluetooth. We figured out that we could use Wi-Fi as our major communication backhaul. And by building up the largest network of Wi-Fi access points in the world, partnering with Wi-Fi aggregators, telecommunications companies, basically any Wi-Fi that you would see out in the world, as well as our customer Wi-Fi hotspots, that gives us good enough visibility to do statistical analysis on our customer shipments. This is only one of the data sets that we look at. We also look at vessel movements, we look at airplane movement, we look at weather, we look at truck movement, pretty much any other piece of data that we can get our hands on to give our customers a holistic view in real time of everything that's going on inside of their supply chain, all the way from the micro levels to the macro levels. And micro for us is generally visibility on a specific shipment. And this is, a pallet moving from manufacturing center to a port onto a vessel, then getting offloaded to another port and put into a warehouse. And we're tracking that whole entire chain from end to end, but we're also analyzing this information to go up on a macro level to figure out how things are performing over time. Here you can kind of see a snapshot of one of the shipments that a customer had that started off in Germany, went to the port of Antwerp, got loaded onto a vessel. That's when we started transitioning into leveraging AIS information. And I'll go into a little bit more of why we're working on the satellite space in a little bit. But we transitioned over into the satellite space, into this AIS information, so that we could really get a full view of this shipment throughout the end-to-end transportation. Eventually, the vessel ended up in King Abdullah Port in Saudi Arabia, and then finally ended up, at its final manufacturing facility. But throughout the course of the shipment, we're capturing temperature, we're capturing humidity, acceleration, vibration, shock, merging in information directly from our customers. It looks like I've already got a question from Gary about how we track an ocean container inland before it gets loaded onto a vessel. I'll get into that in just a second, Gary. But throughout the course of the shipment, we'll be pulling in information from ERPs of our customers to give us bill of lading information, and we can even link together SKUs with these bills of lading and our own devices to figure out, the value of delay in transit. We can figure out, how much inventory you've got out in the system and actively calculate the true value of how things are moving around. But Gary, the way that we track our shipments is, because we track directly from the point of manufacture. Let's go back to this. You see on the left here, we've got a customer that directly affixes our shipment onto a pallet that gets then loaded into a container. So our customers don't generally own their containers. Sometimes they do, but throughout the course of the shipment, the device would transmit information regarding that pallet, not necessarily that container. So we then use our pallets as a proxy to container information. So I hope that answers your question. But to move on to a little bit more of the analysis side, as we start to capture more and more information, we start to figure out how closed loop networks are performing. So what you're looking at here is one customer who's using our data to track a set of shipments between two distribution centers. And in this one scenario, they had developed a new kind of truck that could lift heavier objects over a long period of time. So initially, the trucks that were going between these two facilities would only be 20 to 30% full. With these new trucks, they were able to increase the number of goods that would fit inside of a truck so that they could be roughly 60 to 70% full, which meant that they could do more throughput over time. The problem for them was they needed to be able to predict when these trucks were going to arrive at these distribution centers so they could tell the people at the gates, hey, let's open up a door for our truck to enter in, instead of having to wait in line for all the other trucks to get offloaded, so that they could increase the number of turns that happen between these two facilities. And with our predictive analysis, we were able to continuously analyze the estimated time of arrival of these trucks so that the guys at the gates could say, hey, open up that door, so that this truck could be used. And it turns out that if you have information about this stuff, it makes it pretty easy to go from, I think it was 7 or 8 turns a day that they were doing originally to now they're doing 30 or something turns, to actually get the level of analysis that they need. And Gary, it looks like you've asked another question. What if there are no pallets in a container? Even though we do live on the level of pallets, that's not to say that we aren't able to track the individual containers instead. So these devices are super inexpensive. You could put them on pretty much anything that you would want. Right now, we've got folks tracking pallets. We've got folks tracking trailers, totes, other reusable assets. That's not to say that we couldn't have people tracking individual containers. That has been a use case that we've discussed in the past, but that's generally not the area that we like to live in. Right. So just to jump back into the more of the analysis, with the data that we're capturing from these devices, plus this AIS information, plus this ADSB information, and all this other tracking stuff we can look at, we're able to start analyzing how specific trade lanes are performing and figure out whether or not you're picking the right ports to ship through, the right carriers to get from point A to point B, and just to make sure that we're reducing the amount of in-transit days that your inventory has. So what you're looking at here is that same customer who was shipping something from Germany to Saudi Arabia that traditionally ships via the port of Antwerp. They had always used this port because that's just the way it's always been done, quote unquote. And as we were analyzing more and more of this data, we were able to figure out that, you know, there were opportunities for this one customer to shave off up to 9 days in ship time by picking a different port and trucking it a little bit further. You would expect that this is something that a lot of these manufacturers could do for themselves. I just, you know, having the information about not just where a vessel is, but how ports are performing as well as how carriers are performing, that really allows you to figure out, you know, am I moving things the right way? What's the risk of, you know, changing carriers? What's the risk of changing ports? So by us analyzing all of this information, we're able to help figure out the on-time performance of pretty much every carrier in the world. We're able to make predictions about when things will get offloaded. We're able to make predictions about, you know, will there be, you know, some sort of disruption at this port over time? And with this information, you're able to reduce the amount of in-transit inventory that you've got. So this is going a little bit higher up in the micro to macro chain. So I don't know if you can see on the bottom, you've got micro on the bottom left, and then there's this gray slider that we've been moving from point to point to point. Where things start to get really interesting is the supply network analysis that we do for our customers. So here you'll see one subset of a customer supply chain where we're starting off at the manufacturing facility in Canada to a mixing center in Middle America, all the way to distribution centers of their customers that are kind of scattered throughout the US, and all the way to the final point of retail. And what you'll note is in the little graph on the left here, you can start to see that there's all of this inventory that's getting built up. And part of the value in the supply network analysis that, you know, is built from the micro level data to this macro level stuff is, you know, we're able to start figuring out where, you know, where are these pallets, where are these containers, where are these assets, all the way into the retail supply chain. So as a manufacturer, you can truly synchronize where you're building stuff, how you're building stuff, where is there variability inside of the supply chain, so you can reduce the risk and reduce the variability so that you could truly be cost effective. So, you know, that's kind of the level that we like to live in. I think now is the time where I'll start to talk a little bit about the actual product. And I don't know if you can still see my screen here. Yes, great. So here on my screen currently is basically an elaboration of what you just saw. This is real information of shipment info. So you can start to see where things are, when things arrived. You can start to see, you know, how long are your individual shipments sitting there. You can figure out who's performing well, who's not. Is my mixing center being used like a distribution center, where, you know, a mixing center really should just be a point where things get cross-docked pretty much immediately, and if you have to move inventory into some sort of staging zone, oh, zoom in please, okay, you start to use these manufacturing facilities as a distribution center. It starts to become super expensive from an inventory perspective. How's that? Is that better? Can you guys see that? I think so. You start to increase the amount of infrastructure costs. You start to increase the amount of risk. You start to increase. All right, I'll make this full screen. How did that go? There we go. You start to increase a lot of, you start to introduce a lot of risk inside of your supply chain. So by, you know, introducing a little bit of visibility from a network perspective, you know, that's where you can start to drive true ROI in asset tracking. And so just to kind of drill into some of the visibility that we provide to our customers, you know, this is a snapshot of another shipment that went from Germany to Spain, and throughout the course of the shipment, it's pinging back to us, and we're constantly making guesses as to, you know, how things are going to perform. And in this scenario, we're able to see that throughout the whole entire shipment, it led roughly 99% in transit time, which is very high. If an asset is sitting at a specific facility, it's effectively incurring costs that our customers generally don't want. So you'll also note here that as we sample the environment and are scanning for location, we're also capturing temperature, and you can see that it's relatively consistent. This is again, a simple, relatively straightforward asset tracking product, but it's incredibly cost effective. When you're talking about the traditional asset tracker that lives anywhere from $50 to $100 per device, and you all of a sudden go to the sub $10 mark, that gets real interesting real fast. Here's another snapshot of some shipment level information where we're again going on this multiple mode of transit thing where we're starting from Germany, and you'll even note that our devices are transmitting while they're in port, which is kind of cool. So the devices are getting loaded onto a vessel, get dropped into the ports over time, and then eventually end up in their final destination in Morocco. Here's another snapshot of that same shipment that you saw in the presentation. Should be relatively straightforward. Here we're able to see that the total amount of in-transit time is relatively low, so this one trade lane is not particularly effective. And having this level of information allows you to figure out, maybe I shouldn't be building up inventory. Maybe we could use the existing inventory in the network to, reduce the total operating cost. We've got one more just to show that we do work pretty much everywhere in the world. This is a shipment that started in China, ended up in the US, doing a nice trans-Pacific shipment, again, leveraging the satellite AIS data. And just for context, as a consumer of AIS data, there are a handful of providers out there. There's terrestrial providers and satellite providers. If you're doing terrestrial level stuff, you generally don't see where vessels are in the middle of the ocean. That's one of the reasons why we like the Spire guys. They're able to give us a kind of a true holistic perspective of these vessel movements on a relatively real-time basis as things are going throughout the whole entire world in a unified API. Because back in the old days, you'd have to stitch together multiple data sets, and it's a pain in the butt. So we're very happy with the level of AIS information that we're getting from Spire. Here's another shipment, and I promise I'll stop showing you guys individual shipments in a second. Here's one more shipment that's going from Canada to the US, and here you can see that again, it's all about this in transit number. These numbers start to build up and provide a little bit of a indicator of supply chain health. So the more you've got in transit inventory in a high velocity perspective, the less you've got working capital sitting and waiting. So just to get a little bit into the insights page, here we're starting to figure out, as we go from Germany to other locations. I think one that I've got open right now is Germany and Czech Republic. We're able to see that you've got a handful of different carriers that are 3PLing the shipment, and starting to figure out, this is the mean transit duration for this carrier versus that one. This is how well this carrier keeps your temperature within certain range. This is how variable the different mean versus max transit durations are. And as you're renegotiating contracts with your carriers and 3PLs, this really gives you a leg up to figure out, hey, maybe we can renegotiate our contract because you didn't hold up your end of the bargain. So we're kind of allowing this freight auditing to happen. Excuse me. And then our kind of final view is this high level freight view, where since we're ingesting ERP information, we're able to see, not just generic information about a shipment, but also what's on the shipment. So you'll notice that this one individual shipment has 6 items that we ingested from an ERP. I think our customer at this time was using SAP. So we're able to create a single source of truth that anybody in our customer supply chain can actively look at and comment on and make sure that everybody's on the right page at the right time. So I think that's pretty much all that I've got for the demo. I'm going to jump back into the presentation because I've got a couple more things going on. Well, maybe I'm not. Actually, before I jump into the demo, I'll show you some pretty interesting stuff that we're doing in the graph modeling space, where because we're tracking all of these vessels and making continuous predictions about ETA and duration and all this other stuff, some of the neat analysis that we've been working on is of all of the carriers that go between 2 points, who's performing well, who's not, what ports are highly congested at any point in time, and this is some of the stuff that we're starting to put into our platform on almost a weekly basis. So we're doing some pretty neat analysis, and I think I'll jump back into the presentation. Good. So Ian, now is the time where we're talking about where Odin is today, and I'll talk about where Odin's going in the future. So Odin, we're specializing in this intermodal pallet level visibility, where we're taking advantage of, location, temperature, shock, all these other pieces of data that we're getting directly from the devices that allows us to get true visibility in a specific shipment throughout the whole entire supply chain. And we're ingesting in other data sets. We're getting bills of lading, we're doing ERP integration, we're even generating points of interest. So all these little dots that you see here, they're kind of a hybrid manual automated thing where we're analyzing the movement of goods and guessing where certain facilities are over time to figure out, is this guy operating like a DC? Is this guy operating like a manufacturing facility? Is this a mixing center? And that allows our customers to start figuring out, how well their supply chain is performing. And the true value of this is this value stream mapping that we're doing. Generally, it would require a real person to start at the point of manufacture and literally sit next to a pallet from end to end. So, one of our customers literally had to have, some of their high-level logistics professionals take a ride with their shipments going from Canada to the final point of retail to figure out, how well are we doing? Are there things that we could be doing better? And what we're starting to enable is this virtual value stream map, where we're allowing kind of that real-time analysis on a global basis. So it's like you've got someone sitting next to your pallets all the time, always, and continuously figuring out where there's waste. Where we're going is part of the really interesting stuff that we're excited to share with you guys. And this is the us going from the predictive layer into the prescriptive layer, where we're taking advantage of our knowledge of the maritime world to make predictions about delays at ports because of container cranes being full, and we want to start taking into account weather information, and we're kind of starting to do a little bit of that on a low level, but because of the data that Spire's got, we're really excited about some of the possibilities of marrying this vessel information with other weather things to start to figure out where the variability at the trade lanes in the ocean start to kind of get interesting. We're starting to rank and rate not just carriers on a vessel perspective. We're also doing this from a land freight perspective. We're also doing this from a port perspective. So we're starting to look at throughput, capacity, congestion for every port in the world. We also are going to end up doing this for airports, for distribution centers, for both internal and external points of interest. And we're also starting to add in some of our anomaly detection, where anomalous behavior inside of our customers' supply chain starts to add up to all sorts of weird variability, which in theory ends up costing our customers a whole lot of money. I think that's all I've got from the presentation side. I've got a bunch of other information that I can drill into if you guys are interested, where I can talk about some of the enclosures where, you know, we're using different kinds of batteries for different kinds of use cases where, you know, the devices in the black enclosures on the, or I guess the device that's currently in the black enclosure on the screen ends up being used on a reusable basis, which means that our battery life is only, a month or 2 months, but the device that's in that thick blue one lasts up to 7 years on a single charge. Doesn't use lithium ion, which means it's a little bit easier to use in air freight. And it's also roughly the same cost. So there's some interesting stuff that we're doing in the technical side. We're also launching a new version of our product that's got cellular on top of all of the stuff that we're doing that introduces a little bit of cost. But if you need a little bit more real-time information, that's some of the stuff that we'd allow for our more real-time visibility. I'll just talk briefly about the landscape and asset tracking. There's a million different companies out there. Orbcom's one of the big players, a bunch of folks in the satellite space, a bunch of folks in the transit tracking space. But as you start to go down the value stream, you start to go into these less expensive assets. There's not a whole lot of players simply because the cost doesn't end up being effective, and that's kind of what makes us special. If you look at us as a pure pallet tracking play, we are orders of magnitude less expensive than anything else that exists in the market right now. Especially when you take RFID into account, where the RFID tags themselves are relatively inexpensive. You're talking about 25 cents, 50 cents, super cheap. But then you've got all this reader infrastructure, and for every facility that you care about, frankly, it just ends up being cost prohibitive to do on a large scale, especially if you as a Procter and Gamble, you've got your set of infrastructure, and then Walmart's got their own set of infrastructure, and there's no data kind of changing hands. We kind of enable global visibility across multiple parties that requires zero infrastructure at relatively low cost. So that's kind of where we sit in the asset tracking space. And on the logistics intelligence space, again, there's a handful of players that exist in the market. What makes us special is we live a little bit more in the predictive and prescriptive space, where we're not just looking at an individual shipment, we're not just looking at the maritime space or the trucking space. We are looking at a holistic supply chain, in transit inventory space that allows true strategic planning to occur. And I'm not going to go through our case studies, but it looks like I've got another question from Gary. Any plans to get into ocean container tracking? I don't see why not. Our devices are relatively inexpensive. I've done it before. Again, for context, my previous company, Weft, we developed a piece of hardware to track shipping containers for shipping lines to help them reduce the number of containers they needed to meet customer demand. But it wasn't quite the right business model at the time because our devices were around $50, and if you've got hundreds of thousands of containers, it ends up being relatively cost ineffective to actively track those devices. With the device that costs $5 to $10, it makes it a little bit more economically feasible. So that's definitely something that we could do. I think our sweet spot right now is to sell into the manufacturers, to work with the guys that are making stuff and helping them with their in-transit inventory. But as we continue to grow and scale and partner with more and more people, there are definitely tons of opportunities for us to work directly with the forwarders, directly with the carriers, directly with the ports even, to help optimize global throughput versus local throughput. And I think that's all I've got.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mark. So we did a really good job of keeping on time. So I'm going to go ahead and take back over control of the presentation really quickly and share one other poll. And because we are able to get through all the slides quickly there, I'm going to go ahead and actually see in a second if anyone wants to ask a question live as well. Before we do that, one other quick poll based on the information you've heard today. Is there an interest in working with AIS data within your firm, be it either rather via a platform like Mark's or directly from a company like Spire, like us? So I'll let that one collect up the results for a second. Okay, thanks everybody. Almost at 70% of you have responded, which is great. Okay, excellent. Okay, I'll go ahead and close that one down. The good news is pretty much the majority of you are interested, either somewhat interested or interested in doing something immediately, which is great. So a few of you are on the audio as well. So those of you who can see the feature on GoToWebinar, on the top right of your GoToWebinar box, there's a little button that says raise your hand. If you're willing to ask a question live from Mark or myself, we're happy to take those now. But you would need just to press that button, which says raise your hand, and then I will unmute your line if you're willing to do that. If not, if we don't get any questions coming in, which is fine, we've had a fair amount coming in on the question and answering poll as well, we can go ahead and wrap up a little early. So I'll give you a few minutes for everybody to see if anyone wants to raise their hand. Thank you, Mark, for answering those questions in real time as they came in. That was very helpful.
My pleasure.
Okay, all right. So we got a couple more questions coming in via the question and answering portal. So we'll go ahead and follow up with those in a few minutes. But based on the fact that no one's interested in talking to us live, that's totally fine. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. So I wanted to thank you, Mark, for the time. Those of you who are in the handout section of the GoToWebinar, there is a PDF there that will give you a little bit more of an overview of what I talked about today regarding the AIS data and Spire. So feel free to download that. And the webinar will be sent, the recording will be sent out to you automatically as well for attending. So if you wanted to go back through it or share it with anybody else, it will be coming. But a big thank you for everybody for taking the time today. And we hope to see you again on another webinar soon. Thank you, Mark, as well.